that many of us here were told some things when we were younger that have stood by us. I'm also guessing that there might be one or two things that most of us have chosen to leave behind. But before I go on with that, let me greet you by saying Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon all of you. I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land. My name is Maria, and I'm so happy to be here. I sense that the spaces created by the FaithFeed initiative, both here and online, have some common ground with an organization I was part of in Melbourne called Benevolence. Benevolence is an organization which was started by Muslim women in 2008. It aims to create welcoming and inclusive spaces specifically to enable spiritual growth and conscious living in accordance with the prophetic tradition. How important it is that we create safe and comfortable spaces to listen to and share our lives together. I wonder, is it only me? Or have some of you also asked someone about their name to get a conversation going? I admit it's one of my social tactics, one of the easier ways to get someone telling you about themselves. But as well as being a tactic, I do genuinely find people's names interesting, and often find that the conversation that results links to other aspects of their lives. So let me mention a name. Many of us here would know Mary, the mother of Jesus, is referred to as Maria in Latin and also in Greek. In Arabic, Mary, the mother of Jesus, is referred to as Maryam. She's also referred to as Miriam in Hebrew and Coptic. I was actually named after the same Maria, Mary, Maryam, the mother of Jesus. And I want to share with you how she is relevant to me as a Muslim woman. In Islam, we believe in the miraculous birth of Jesus, who we refer to as Prophet Isa. And we believe in his mother, Mary. In fact, there is an entire chapter dedicated to Mary in the Quran. And some might be a bit surprised to know that she's actually mentioned more times in the Quran than she is in the Bible. Islam recognizes Mary as one of the 4 spiritually perfected women of the world. I started this sharing a few minutes ago by suggesting that I've left 1 or 2 things behind. One of those things is not my religion, as it turns out, but I have left behind certain interpretations which I believe are not based in the traditional sources of Islam. The significance that Islam places on Mary has profoundly impacted my life and my spiritual journey. I've always had a high regard for men. In particular, one of the main role models in my life is my father and my 2 brothers with whom I share a very special relationship. I also recently got married in January this year, and my husband is another man who I love and respect very much. He also has 2 brothers who I consider as my brothers as well, and all of us share meaningful and interesting discussions about life, faith, and spirituality together. Therefore, men have played and continue to play a significant role in my life. But growing up as an Australian Muslim, I battled with some of the patriarchal interpretations of Islam I saw around me. Why did some people of my religion seem to insist that men had to be more prominent than women in the focus of my religion? More prominent in decision-making, more prominent in professional expertise, supposedly more able in lots of ways. So then I went to university to study law. So another lawyer here, sorry. And of course, that's a time when many of us at university go through an internal spiritual questioning. Interestingly, I became very close friends with a young woman who was a Christian, used to also go to her Christian youth groups, and became friends with a lot of her friends. And it was interesting because she was actually battling a similar sort of thing. She'd found this similar sense of patriarchy, this presumption of male bias in the way things were taught and practiced in the church that she attended. She had a deep faith, but was internally conflicted just like me. As law students and later lawyers, we both learned to question what we were taught and to think critically about the concepts we learned. In a religious sense, this meant that having blind faith was not enough. We both believed in a faith that could grow from within us, and we both knew logically and rationally that there was a conflict in some of the practices and presumptions we experienced. How could some Muslim men and women question whether women could be Islamic scholars? And whereas I was always welcomed as a woman in some mosques, why not in others? I was already studying, so it was a natural stretch to allow these questions to influence my decision into looking into Islamic law. That looking unfolded into researching the intersection of international commercial law and Islamic law, which is the thesis that I focus on in my PhD, which I have now completed. Becoming a lawyer and later an academic, I realized that I believed in understanding religion through its authentic sources. And when I relied on Islam's sources, there was a very interesting story. In Islam, I found that women were in fact elevated. For example, Khadija was the Prophet's first wife, a successful businesswoman who was financially independent. And she was the one who asked the Prophet to marry her. So she proposed to him. What does this say to any remaining presumptions that it is only the man's place to propose? If a woman wants to propose first, why should she not do so? And since researching those influential women, I've come to know more of the never-ending list of amazing Muslim women. Our institutions, however, don't discuss these women in Islam enough, including the media, of course. This omission supports those who want to misconstrue the religion with a patriarchal narrative. And the elements of patriarchy in the surrounding society further enable such presumptions to thrive. This is a case in my religion that calls for the reclaiming of tradition. As for my question of Islamic women being scholars, I was to discover that any objection to that is completely unfounded. One of the main sources of Islamic law is the Quran, our holy book. And another major source of Islam is the Hadith or the Sunnah, which refers to the actions and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, the one we believe is the last messenger of Islam. Much is narrated by a woman, Aisha. She narrates a lot of the Hadith. So here we have a true Islamic scholar and leader in every sense, Aisha is the credible and authentic source of much Islamic law. If anyone wants to question whether women can be scholars, they're actually questioning a key source of Islam itself. I mentioned that the Quran contains an entire chapter dedicated to Mary, the mother of Jesus. And what I found so amazing through my research was that when Mary is referred to in the Quran, many of the times, the way that she is described in the Arabic language, her significance does not solely rely on the fact that she is the mother of the revered prophet Jesus, but on Mary's own intrinsic spiritual qualities. Many references to Jesus in the Quran have his identity based on Mary's rather than the other way around. So we often read the emphasis on Jesus as being the son of Mary, as opposed to Mary being referred to as the mother of Jesus. The Quran tells us that Mary's mother, upon being pregnant with Mary, told God that she wanted her child to be dedicated to the service of God. So Mary's mother, who is known as Anna in the Christian tradition, did not know the gender of her child. But if you mix the commitment that this child would be dedicated to God with the norms of a patriarchal society, you might start to understand Anna's shock that her child was in fact female. Thus began the emergence of a major female spiritual figure within the tradition of Islam. Islamic scholars report that growing up, Mary would regularly study religion in the most honored place at the mosque due to her deep connection with God. The Quran in chapter 3, verse 42 says, "O Mary, God has chosen you and purified you." And it continues to say that she has been chosen above the women of all the nations. I know many Christians here will find strong echoes of this in the Gospel of Luke, where Mary's song of praise says that God has looked with favor on the lowliness of his servant, and that from now on, all generations will call me blessed. Isn't that just beautiful? Mary is a woman who dedicated herself to God. And when facing challenges in her life, as you know, the birth of Jesus was a miracle because Mary had not been with a man. Imagine the challenge of living that story out of wedlock and in a patriarchal society. Perseverance, devotion, faith, resilience are some descriptors of her when facing challenges. Qualities that make Mary a role model for women and men, for Muslims and Christians, in fact, for all of humanity. One story of the Quran that always leaves a profound impact on me is that when Mary was giving birth to Jesus, the Quran mentions that in chapter 19, verse 23, that the pains of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She cried in her anguish, "I wish I had been dead and forgotten long before all of this." Here, Mary's complaining to God that childbirth was so difficult that she would rather die. It then says in the Quran, "But a voice cried to her from beneath the palm tree, 'Do not grieve. Your Lord has provided you a stream.'" This was Angel Jibril, or Gabriel, as you may know as, who tells her, "Do not grieve, do not worry, God is with you." This story really hits home for me. It shows us that God is with us in our vulnerability, that pain and suffering is part of our lives, and God can handle complaining about it. In fact, in Islam, we believe that God wants us, He yearns for us to complain to Him. This is different from a view that somehow God expects us to be perfect. Even Mary, with her elevated status, shared all the human realities, and this allows me to relate to her even more. Women and men need to be empowered to stand for those core truths that can be sensed when we listen to our inner life. Mary is a great empowerer for me. And isn't it true that we still live in a society where patriarchy exists, both in the secular world and in the religious world? The recent Me Too campaign suggests a systematic injustice to women of being objectified and harassed. So easily, many justify the scrutiny of people at every turn. If they are women, that is. It's a scrutiny that disempowers. It's a scrutiny that is discrimination in itself. Why are they full-time mothers? Or why are they in the workforce if they are also mothers? Why they have children? Why they don't have children? How many children do they have? Why someone wears a headscarf? Why someone doesn't wear a headscarf? The list goes on, and women themselves can be part of such scrutiny. Our own Parliamentary Minister for Women questioned the recognition of domestic violence in conditions for workers' leave because it might make women less attractive for employment. We still have some gaps calling us to action. In the invitation to talk tonight, I'm happy to have shared some points of connection across faiths, and I love it when that happens. But as some of the Christian writings of recent decades very well teach, good dialogue across religions doesn't mean that we only have to share our points of connection. Sharing our differences with care and respect can actually function to strengthen each of us in our particular beliefs. So, for example, Islam doesn't hold Jesus as divine, and we don't pray to Jesus. But we do believe in a direct relationship to God, and we sure do speak directly. In fact, we complain directly to God and ask forgiveness directly from God. The reason I mention this is that it has been so important for those times in my life that I've been referring to when I've been taught or I've seen ignorant patriarchal interpretations of Islam. I remember in those times that it is not people who ultimately define Islam for me. It is my inner faith, my inner understanding, and my own direct relationship with God. My faith has remained firm because my relationship is with God. And when I extend that thinking to other men and women with whom I share faith, then that motivates me to maintain and build my commitment to the faith community with other people. Why should we be alone in faith? What a crazy idea. Although I can't personally compare the pain that Mary felt under that palm tree or the suffering of the social stigma she would have faced in her society, I do know those times of pain and anguish when my religion is distorted by my own community and by the broader community. And I do complain about it. Boy, do I complain about it. It's then that I remember the soothing reassurance of Angel Jibreel. Do not grieve. God is with you. God has provided for you. My faith rests in God, not in people who distort God, and with brothers and sisters across faiths and contexts, I pray for the strength and resilience for us all that God desires to give. Thank you.